Now, foreign direct investment in African countries hit a record $83 billion last year, according to the UN's World Investment Report. That's more than double the amount reported the year before. And some interesting facts emerged from that UNCTAD report. While companies from some of the world's biggest economies increasingly seek to expand into Africa, Japanese companies, it seems, are still pretty hesitant about doing business on the continent. Also, potential investors still see Africa as the least attractive destination. But Africa itself has also been helping to push up investments, with intra-African investment growing substantially, led by South Africa, Kenya, and Nigeria. And interestingly, while foreign direct investment into Nigeria also went up, it's still massively less than what it was in 2014-2015. Well, to make sense of all that, let's speak now to the macroeconomic policy analyst, Professor Ken Ife, who's also a lead consultant to ECOWAS, the World Bank, and the African Development Bank. Thank you so much for coming in. Always lovely to have the benefit of your range of economic experience.
Thank you.
Let's start with that headline-grabbing figure of $83 billion of investment into Africa. Largely, where is it coming from and where is it going?
Oh, for the African continent, you have to look at the different regions. The big chunk actually went to the Southern African region, and of course, there's a bigger chunk in that.
Yeah.
That is due to the reorganizing their shares, and that was much more internal. Over 43% of world investment is intra company, and is reflected more in South Africa.
Yes.
But apart from that, as you begin to look at other regions, Mozambique did well within South Africa and Zambia, so they all did well. Then the next in line is East Africa. You know, the East Africa story is because of the China Belt and Silk Initiative.
Yes.
Which is quite heavy. So about $4 to $5 billion, and it's a sustainable, investment going. That's the Horn of Africa. That's where they're doing most of that. And then you come down to West Africa. West Africa did a modest growth, obviously led by Nigeria. Nigeria captured $4.8 billion of that, followed by Ghana. In fact, the four musketeers in West Africa when it comes to FDI is Nigeria, Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire, and Senegal. So those three they run in billions. Then others will have to find their way of the 15 countries.
Right.
Central Africa was, zero growth. They were stable, but zero growth. And much of it is coming from DRC Congo, the Democratic Republic of Congo. Then, of course, the North Africa were in decline.
Yes.
Investment was in decline there.
And so it's the usual suspects, is it? The UK, the EU, who are treading very heavily in Africa. The US apparently stomping up several billions a year, and of course China as well. All of them investing heavily in Africa. Is that where the money's coming from? Oh
yes, is China, UK, very strong investment coming from UK, and then you have Europe, and of course United States. That's where the bulk. We can get into more details when we look to Nigeria.
Yes.
To give you very good example.
Well, actually,
but bear in mind that what we're talking about is foreign direct investment.
Yes,
FDI.
that is true.
And the FDI, when we look at Nigerian figures, especially the last quarter, second quarter of this year, not 2021, you see a clear picture. FDI only accounts for less than 10% of Nigerians' capital importation. So even though it is high in the context of the 2021, but it is very small
let's talk about that, because that's obviously what we're let's face it, that's what we're mostly interested in. I mean, according to those UN figures that you were pointing to, Nigeria getting more FDI last year than it did the year before. But that's a bit deceptive, isn't it? Because the FDI coming to this country has dropped considerably since 2014.
Significantly. Yes, but I'm saying that it is still representing a very small proportion of capital importation. In fact, if you look at the figure of quarter two, 2022, the portfolio investment was 49%, even though that still was low, it was even below 1 billion for a quarter. It was 49%, and the FDI was 147 million, which is just 9.6%.
Yes.
Then you have the other investments that are accounted for 41%. Altogether $1.5 billion. But that's quarter. So by the time you get to December,
yes,
you can add up all
yes.
of them. And one thing that is remarkable about it, because we need to see the distribution. What sectors are bringing in this money? You have the banking sector is taking the chunk. About 42% is coming into the banking sector. Then that is followed by the financing sector, which is 13%. Production is also reasonably just around 15% for production. Agriculture is the one that should be next in line in terms of the distribution, sectoral distribution of these investments.
Yes.
But if you look at the sources are UK heavy for the unbelievable. Just after this Brexit, we are getting a lot more investment from UK. 51% of the investment coming from UK, followed by Singapore, which is about 9%, and South Africa. And South Africa is very significant. Not only that South Africa is 8%, but it's very significant. Why? Because if you look at the banks that are the sources of these investments, the channels, they're all mostly South African banks. You have the Citibank accounting for over 20% of the money coming in. Then you have Barclays. Barclays taking the second chunk of 21%. And Stanbic. Those are 3 banks.
So, I mean,
so not only that we have South African investment coming into the country, but also South African banks are in the frontiers. Of course, you would say that much of the money coming in from China could well be coming through Stanbic and South Africa.
Yes.
So, but that makes us a strategic partner to Nigeria, South Africa.
It's very interesting, isn't it? Because you were saying that the foreign direct investment just makes up a small percentage of the capital inflow into Nigeria. But that's what all the presidential candidates are talking about, that needs to dramatically increase. That's the way they're hoping to, reduce unemployment, strengthen the economy.
There are many hostages to that fortune.
Yeah.
There are many hostages. First of all, the foreign direct investment refers to equity.
Yeah.
Investment that come into equity in companies from foreign companies. That's what I'm referring to. There are tens of billions of dollars of domestic investments.
Right.
As captured by the Nigerian Investment Promotion Council. You cannot go and tell me that what is coming in, all that money being spent in Lagos, in Lekki, $560 million. No, it's huge.
Yeah.
But they don't fall into the definition of foreign direct investment. And there are companies in the country that are expanding.
So internally generated.
It doesn't fit into this. So it has to be seen to have come in from outside. It has to be seen to have been directed to equity positions. It has to be seen. So it doesn't tell you the whole story. Dangote, it's not $19 billion is put in the refinery. Have you seen that?
That's not reflected in the FDI figures.
But there's another area too, the destination of the investment. Lagos accounts for 68% of the investment, the destination.
So it takes the more than...
Bulk goes to Lagos. Abuja, of course, accounts for 30%. The next one would have been Port Harcourt and maybe Kanu, but those are where the bulk of the investment.
That's very interesting.
But of course, also we don't consider diaspora remittance. Diaspora remittance is $26 billion on record, going down to just over $5 billion because of all this COVID and all that stuff and foreign market stuff. But the real value is over 35 billion. That's the things we are talking about are what we measure. But how many?
Yes, I see what you mean. There's a lot of it. It's a bit like the Nigerian economy, the informal sector and the formal sector.
And also, when you look at West Africa and Africa, you see intra and inter-regional trade. We began the same story with Europe about 40 years ago. And all of us had the same 10% intra-regional trade. But by now, Europe has 70% intra-regional trade, and we are still logging 14%.
We're still on the sidelines, basically.
But what it is because over 60% of what goes on between these countries are informal and are not being captured.
Absolutely.
So trade is going on. but they're not being captured.
That's a very good point. And returning to the wider African continent, that investment report seems to suggest that of the big global economies, Japanese companies seem to be reluctant to invest in Africa. Why is that, given the huge size of Japan's economy?
Well, you have to also think about the profile of the Japanese industry. Japan is not in the solid mineral kind of investment. They were what they were just because of investment in human capacity.
Yes.
In electronics, in cars. So what are you actually going to be supplying to?
And that tends to be attractive to more developed economies, isn't
Absolutely.
it? Yeah.
So if you see
they can afford to pay for it.
If they go to put a plant in America, they can put $10-20 billion in the plant in America.
Knowing that they'll get their money back.
Yeah, I know. So we can't. Whereas China is a different animal altogether.
Yes.
If you look at the trade imbalance between Nigeria, it's about just over 2.5 trillion naira trade imbalance in one quarter between Nigeria and China. Is because China is in everything. It's commodities and food, anything and everything.
Yes.
And we're falling victim to that and importing anything, including toothpick and furniture and everything from China.
Well, what is interesting about the Japanese thing is that FDI into Africa in 2013 hit a record $13 billion, but it's been dropping every single year since then. So maybe they suddenly woke up and thought, wait a minute, why are we putting money? I mean, nobody's going to buy a brand new car. They'd rather buy a second-hand car.
Yeah, but their cars are dominant in the industry.
Yeah, they are.
You know, 7 out of every 10 cars you see are Japanese cars. And then, of course, 6 out of those 10 are
yeah, but the second-hand trade in cars is very big in Africa, isn't it? And I mean, a car that would last 5 years in the UK would probably last 25 years here.
I know. When I did a study for World Bank across the region from Nigeria, Lagos to Abidjan, looking at authorized economic operator custom preferential mechanism. And I interrogated the custom officer, the custom head in Cotonou. Actually, 400,000 cars, second-hand cars, come from there into Nigeria. Whereas officially, we import only 200,000 cars through our Loro ports. So twice that is coming as second-hand through the porous borders. And of course, 60% of their economy depends on that, those cross-border trade.
So even though Africa is said to be the growth story of the 21st century, I wonder what your assessment is of Nigeria's economic diplomacy strategy. I mean, are we losing out on a lot of that? Is this much vaunted economic dominance on the continent? Are we losing out on it?
No, I don't think so. Even if anything, we are getting ourselves ready for this. For example, the PIA going into operation, and then the NNPC, registering as a private company.
Right.
Just by doing that alone, you could see $5 billion coming to it from Afrexim Bank. And of course, they can give you another $10 billion if you play the right game. And if NNPC goes to the capital market, I reckon that their value is not less than $100 billion as they are, the asset value. And if they decide to sell 20% share, that will rake in, over $20 billion. And some of those will be in the FDI.
You must be a very rich man.
That would be
because you understand these things that most people have no idea what you're talking about. So I mean, you must know how to get all your percentages and count your money in the morning and count it again at night.
Saudi Arabia needed $25 billion, but it's among the richest in the world. But they didn't want to borrow that money from any multilateral development bank. But it says, go and tell me the value of Saudi Aramco. And when they valued it in 2019, it was 1.5 trillion.
Yes,
and he said, look, go to the capital market, get 5%.
Yeah.
Get 5%. So this is the same thing. And now, just by the fact that that company went to the capital market, which means corporate governance became stronger, then the value has risen within 2 years to $2.3 trillion, the highest capitalized company in the world.
That's extraordinary.
So if you see Nigerian NNPC go down that route and do about 10% share or something, not only that you are going to rake in that dollar to sort out some of the prevent us from dropping from the cliff, and at the same time recapitalize NNPC and offer shares to the militants, to all the oil marketers, offer shares to everybody. And then you now get a stronger sense of ownership, and those militants will fight those who are bunkering.
That's a very intriguing idea. That's a very intriguing idea, and I think that's a jolly good idea. So we've got about a minute and a half left, sadly, to end the chat. Is it right to say that Africa is the growth story of the 21st century? Because in modern terms, it's a very young and dynamic population. The domestic economy is potentially enormous. And the African Continental Free Trade Agreement promises some really significant boosts for the continent, doesn't it?
I think so. I think so on so many counts. One, the population continues to rise. It's not like the other economies where they're actually going down. Then second thing is that the solid minerals in the continent are just, Nigeria, 44 solid minerals in mineable quantity, only accounting for 0.3% of our GDP. We've got a huge gap in there compared to South Africa, which is a dominant revenue earner. Then of course, we have oil, we have gas, and in good quantity to fuel to do the transition plans.
So the right policies is what we need.
That's what we need. But also the intra-regional market that has been opened up. I remember saying to some of our member states that West Africa alone, government procures $100 billion government procurement. I said, could you consider that could be an investment coming into West Africa if you do regional procurement, open up the regional procurement so that all the countries can, use like 100 billion being injected into your economy rather than fleeing from your economy. That's just government procurement.
I have to say, listening to you gives me hope for this country. Thank you very much indeed. Professor Ken Ife is a macroeconomic policy analyst and lead consultant to ECOWAS, the World Bank, and the African Development Bank. Thank you.